Welcome to my channel. I hope today's story captures your interest and leaves you wanting more. Your continued support truly means a lot to me. Now, let's get started with the story.
My name is Michael. 17 years ago, I married Lauren and stepped into a house that already had fingerprints on the walls and another man's shadow in the hallway. Ethan was 6 then. Thin, watchful, protective of a last name that wasn't mine. I never tried to replace it. I tried to earn space beside it. I signed the marriage license knowing what I was walking into. I told myself love was a choice, not an accident of blood. I told myself presence would matter more than biology. I believed consistency could outlast DNA. So I stayed. I paid for braces when his teeth came in crooked. I paid for private tutoring when math made him feel small. I covered summer camps, soccer uniforms, field trips, laptops, prom suits. Every receipt was proof of something I hoped would one day be acknowledged. Not worship, not gratitude carved in stone, just respect. When he was 13 and broke his wrist, I was the one in the emergency room chair. When he failed his first driving test and slammed the passenger door in frustration, I was the one who calmly told him we'd try again next week. When he got into college, I wrote the check before he even asked. Lauren would sometimes say, "You don't have to do all this." But she never stopped me, and Ethan never refused it. College tuition, room and board, spending money so he wouldn't feel lesser than his friends. When he wanted to start a business fresh out of graduation, something ambitious and risky, I funded it. Seed capital, legal fees, marketing launch. When the bank hesitated on his mortgage application years later, it was my financial guarantee that tipped the balance. My credit history, my collateral, my signature. Technically, I was his stepfather. In practice, I was the infrastructure. From the outside, we looked solid. Christmas photos in matching sweaters. Vacations in carefully curated resorts. Social media captions about family first. I learned how easily appearances can be manufactured when one person is willing to finance them. But even in the best moments, there was always a thin pane of glass between us. Invisible, unbreakable. I could see through it. I could hear laughter on the other side. I just never fully stepped into it. His biological father drifted in and out over the years like a seasonal storm. Loud, dramatic, temporary. A birthday gift here, a weekend visit there. Always enough to maintain the title. Never enough to carry the weight. I told myself titles didn't matter. Effort did. The wedding was supposed to be the final proof that effort had won. A private estate in Georgia. White columns rising against a blue sky. Manicured lawns. Fountains that whispered money. I rented the entire property for the weekend. Ceremony on the south lawn. Reception under a glass tent lit with chandeliers. Imported roses flown in from Ecuador. A live band from Atlanta. A custom bourbon bar aged to impress guests who didn't know the difference. I paid every invoice personally. Every contract bore my name. The chartered honeymoon flight to the Bahamas was booked months in advance. First-class service. Oceanfront suite waiting upon arrival. I wanted their first week of marriage to feel effortless, because that's what I had always tried to make life for Ethan. Effortless. On the day of the wedding, I arrived early. I watched the staff assemble what my money had purchased. Linen being steamed, silverware polished, floral arrangements positioned to catch the golden hour light. It was beautiful. Lauren moved through the preparations glowing with pride. She squeezed my hand at one point and whispered, "It's perfect." But she didn't say, "Thank you." Ethan looked confident in his tailored suit. He shook hands, laughed loudly, accepted congratulations like someone who believed he had built this moment entirely himself. I waited for a quiet second alone with him. It never came. He didn't ask me to stand beside him during the ceremony. His biological father sat in the second row, chest puffed out as though history could be erased by proximity. No one questioned it. Blood has a way of rewriting narratives. I told myself this was not about me. I repeated it like a mantra. The ceremony passed in a blur of vows and applause. Claire looked radiant. Ethan looked triumphant. Guests cheered. Glasses clinked. I stood near the fountain during the reception, holding a drink I barely touched, watching, observing, calculating in the quiet corners of my mind. 17 years of investment stood dancing in front of me. And yet, something felt off. Not dramatic, not obvious, just a subtle shift in gravity. Claire approached me just after the band started its second set. Her expression wasn't celebratory. It was controlled, determined. She stopped 3 feet in front of me, close enough that I could smell her perfume. "You're not welcome here," she said loudly enough for nearby guests to hear. "Leave. You're nothing to him." The words didn't echo. They detonated. The music stuttered. Conversations stalled. A glass shattered somewhere behind me. I turned to Ethan. He didn't defend me. He didn't even meet my eyes. His silence was louder than her voice. Lauren stood several feet away, frozen, watching, saying nothing. In that moment, the truth I had avoided for nearly 2 decades stood naked in front of me. I had never crossed that pane of glass. I had simply financed the room on the other side of it. Claire stepped closer, emboldened by the quiet. "Paying for things doesn't make you family." 17 years collapsed into a single sentence. Not anger, clarity. A cold, surgical clarity that strips away illusion without mercy. I set my untouched drink on the fountain's edge, adjusted my jacket, nodded once, not to them but to myself. I walked toward the exit. No one stopped me. Not Ethan. Not Lauren. Not the guests who had toasted under lights I funded. Outside, the Georgia evening air was thick and warm. The estate glowed behind me like a stage set. Beautiful, artificial, temporary. I sat inside my car and closed the door. For a long moment, I stared at the steering wheel. If I was nobody, then my obligations were nothing. The simplicity of it almost felt elegant. I unlocked my phone. Every contract was in my name. And for the first time in 17 years, I stopped acting like a father and started acting like a man who had just been told he never was one. I made the first call. The venue manager answered on the 3rd ring. His voice was cheerful, professional, oblivious. "Mr. Carter, everything is running smoothly. Beautiful event." I looked at the estate in my rearview mirror. Lights glowing, guests laughing, music swelling again, hesitant but recovering. "Yes," I said evenly. "About that, I need to reverse the payment." Silence. "I'm sorry. The full payment," I clarified. "Venue, staffing, service fees. The authorization was processed this morning. I'm disputing it." His tone shifted immediately, confused, alarmed. "Sir, that would shut the event down." I leaned back in my seat, felt my pulse steady itself. "That's correct." There was a rush of words on the other end. Contractual obligations, policies, legal consequences. I listened without interrupting. When he paused to breathe, I gave him the only sentence that mattered. "All contracts are under my name. I was just informed that I'm not part of the family. I see no reason to continue sponsoring the evening." Another silence. Longer this time. He understood. Money is a language everyone speaks fluently. "I'll notify accounting," he said carefully. "Do that." I ended the call. No shaking hands. No surge of adrenaline. Just an unsettling calm. A man aligning reality with definition. If I was nobody, then my role ended at the word. Next call. Catering. A woman answered, polite, rehearsed warmth in her voice. I identified myself, gave the invoice number, requested immediate cancellation of remaining service. "Sir, we're midway through dinner. I'm aware. You understand this will result in..." "Yes. Penalties, legal review, dispute process, all manageable." I authorized the chargeback through my banking app while she was still explaining policy. The screen confirmed the request within seconds. One by one, I continued. The band, the open bar distributor, the floral supplier whose final installment had cleared hours earlier, the charter company for the honeymoon flight. I canceled the authorization before the aircraft crew had even filed departure paperwork. Every call was clinical, direct, efficient. not revenge. Correction. I sat in the quiet of my car and reviewed what I had just done. 17 years of swallowing humiliation had ended in 12 minutes of phone calls. Then I made the call I had been rehearsing in my head for months. Because the truth is, this night had not surprised me. It had confirmed something I had sensed for years. I dialed my attorney. He answered immediately. I had warned him weeks earlier that something was shifting inside the house. "Is it time?" he asked. "Yes." I instructed him to activate the exit clause from the joint business Ethan technically led, but I had fully financed. My shares comprised 70% of its operating capital. Without my backing, the credit line would be reassessed automatically. "Proceed," I said. There was no anger in my voice, no tremor, just clarity. When I finally stepped out of the car, I didn't return to the reception. I drove. 10 minutes down the road, my phone began vibrating. Lauren. Ignored. Ethan. Ignored. Claire. Blocked. Then the venue manager again. I answered this one. "Mr. Carter," he said, voice tight. "Accounting has confirmed the reversal request. Without secured funds, we are obligated to suspend service." "Understood. Guests are asking questions." "They should." I ended the call. 40 minutes after I left, the machine I had built began to stall. I didn't need to see it. I could imagine it. The band lowering instruments. Staff clearing plates half finished. The bar closing mid-pour. Managers whispering to Claire with tight smiles and contractual language. Confusion turning to panic. Because weddings are emotional until they become financial. Then they're fragile. Lauren called again. This time I answered. "Michael, what did you do?" Her voice trembled between fury and disbelief. "I adjusted my involvement. They're shutting everything down. People are leaving." "I was asked to leave first." "That's not the same thing." "It is," I said quietly. "Very much the same." She began speaking quickly. Excuses, context, insisting Claire was emotional, that Ethan didn't mean anything by his silence. "Did he say that?" I asked. There was no answer. "He stood there," I continued. 17 years. And he stood there. "You're overreacting." "No," I said. "I'm responding." In the background, I could hear raised voices. Claire shouting at someone. The muffled chaos of an unraveling celebration. "Please," Lauren whispered now. "Fix this." "I can't fix what I finally understand." I ended the call. An hour later, Ethan called. His voice was no longer confident. It was strained. The payments were reversed. "Yes. Why would you do this?" I considered the question carefully. "Because I was informed I'm nothing to you." That was Claire. She was upset. "And you?" Silence. "Ethan," I said, steady and measured. "In 17 years, have I ever embarrassed you publicly?" "No." "Have I ever withdrawn support without reason?" "No." "Tonight was reason." "You're ruining my wedding." "No," I corrected. "I funded your wedding. You removed me from it." His breathing grew heavier, anger mixing with fear. "You can't just take everything back." "I can." And I did. He swore under his breath. "The honeymoon was cancelled." "I'm aware." "You're punishing Claire." "I'm aligning with reality." "What does that even mean?" "It means if I'm not family, I'm not financing family privileges." There was nothing left to say. When the call ended, I drove home. By the time I walked into the house, the emails had already begun. Bank confirmations, vendor acknowledgments, legal notifications. The joint business credit review had triggered automatically once my withdrawal request was processed. Without my guarantees, their leverage ratio shifted overnight. Consequences move quickly when money moves. Around midnight, headlights swept across my living room wall. Ethan's car. He knocked once. Hard. I opened the door. Gone was the groom glowing under chandelier light. In his place stood a man staring at structural collapse. "They stopped everything," he said. "I know." The guests left. Claire's parents are furious. I studied his face. 17 years reflected back at me. Why didn't you say anything? I asked quietly. About what? When she told me to leave. He swallowed. I didn't want to make a scene. You didn't have to. You only had to speak. He looked away. In that moment, I understood something deeper than anger. I had not been betrayed tonight. I had been confirmed. And confirmation is colder than betrayal. Dad, he started. I raised my hand gently. No, he flinched. You forfeited that word when you forfeited my place. He stood there searching for leverage. There was none left. Behind him, the night was silent. Behind me, the house I had paid for stood solid and undisturbed. You didn't just cancel the wedding, he said finally. You pulled funding from the company. Yes, that will destroy us. No, I replied evenly. It will reveal you. He stared at me as if seeing me clearly for the first time. 17 years. And only now did he realize the foundation had a name. Mine. Fix it, he said quietly. I met his eyes. I already did. And that was the moment he began to understand what it truly meant to call someone nothing. Because when nothing withdraws, everything collapses. By the time Ethan stepped into my house that night, the wedding was no longer a celebration. It was a cautionary tale circulating through phone screens and whispers. I had already seen the notifications. Payment authorization reversed. Service suspended pending resolution. Credit line under review. Each message was sterile, professional, ruthless. Money does not argue. It executes. Ethan stood in my foyer like someone who had just discovered gravity applies to him too. His tuxedo jacket was wrinkled now. His bow tie loosened. There was dried champagne on his sleeve. You didn't have to go that far, he said. I closed the door behind him. The quiet inside the house felt deliberate, controlled. I went exactly as far as I needed to. He ran a hand through his hair, pacing once across the hardwood floor I had paid off years ago. They shut down dinner, he continued. People were still eating. They literally started clearing plates. Yes. The band packed up mid-set. Yes. The honeymoon flight was cancelled while we were still standing there. I looked at him steadily. Yes. His voice cracked then. Claire was humiliated. I tilted my head slightly. So was I. Silence filled the space between us. He stopped pacing, faced me directly. You could have talked to me. I tried to, I replied, with my eyes, when she told me to leave. He exhaled sharply. She didn't mean it like that. How did she mean it? He had no answer. I walked to the kitchen and poured myself a glass of water. Not whiskey, not anger, just water. Behind me, Ethan's voice dropped lower. The venue manager announced that the primary payment had been disputed. In front of everyone. Claire's father looked at me like I'd committed fraud. I leaned against the counter. You didn't commit fraud, I said calmly. You committed silence. His jaw tightened. Claire screamed at the staff, he continued. Said they were ruining her wedding. They told her the account holder had withdrawn authorization. And who is the account holder? He didn't respond. 40 minutes, he said quietly. That's all it took for everything to unravel. Yes, I agreed. Because everything was built on something you dismissed. He looked at me then, not as a stepfather, not as a sponsor, but as the man who had held the structure upright. The guests started leaving, he said. Some tried to stay. Others said it felt awkward, like we'd lied about something. You did, I answered. He flinched. You let the room believe I was just a wallet. He stepped closer, frustration rising again. This is extreme. You pulled funding from the business too. The bank emailed me tonight. They're reviewing our credit line. Yes, that company has employees. I'm aware. You could collapse it. No, I corrected evenly. I could stop holding it up. He stared at me like he was trying to find the version of me he'd always known. The predictable one. The patient one. The one who would eventually smooth everything over. He wasn't finding him. You always said family comes first, he muttered. I meant it, I said. He frowned. Then why? Because tonight, I interrupted softly. I learned I was never included in that definition. The words landed heavier than any raised voice could have. He turned away, pressing his hands against his temples. Claire's parents are threatening to sue the venue, he said after a moment. They can try. They think you sabotaged it. I adjusted my participation. That's not how it looks. I don't care how it looks. For 17 years, I had cared deeply how it looked. The smiling photos, the cohesive narrative, the illusion of seamless blending. I was done caring. Ethan's phone buzzed again in his hand. He glanced at the screen, then at me. The bank froze our expansion loan pending review of capital backing, he said. Without your guarantee, the numbers change. They do. He swallowed hard. We won't qualify. I let the silence stretch long enough for him to sit with that reality. When you build something on borrowed strength, I said quietly, you should at least respect the source. He looked up sharply. I never disrespected you. I held his gaze. You stood there. That was all. 17 years reduced to that moment of stillness while his wife erased me publicly. He paced again, slower now. Claire didn't understand the dynamics. He tried. She understood enough to define them. She was emotional. So was I. But you didn't act emotional. No, I said. I acted deliberate. That word seemed to unsettle him more than anger would have. He moved toward the window, staring out into the darkness. My biological father wouldn't even answer, he admitted quietly. When I called him after everything fell apart, I didn't respond. He texted, said he couldn't get involved in financial drama. I let that settle too. For years, I had been compared to a man who rarely showed up. Tonight, comparison was no longer necessary. Ethan's voice softened. Claire thought. She thought you paid because you had to, because you wanted control. I almost smiled. Control, I repeated. If I wanted control, I would have demanded acknowledgement years ago. He didn't argue that. I paid because I believed in stability, I continued. In legacy, in building something solid. And now I'm aligning with truth. He turned from the window and faced me fully. What does that mean for us? There it was. Not anger. Fear. For us, I said slowly, it means you learn what the structure actually was. He stood still. The house financing you secured? I continued. That approval relied on my asset portfolio as supplemental assurance. His eyes widened slightly. If the bank reevaluates without that backing, your rate changes. Possibly your approval. He said nothing. The business credit line? I added. Structured under my guarantee. Withdraw that and risk assessments shift. His breathing grew shallow. You didn't just cancel a wedding, he said finally. You pulled the floor out from under everything. No, I corrected again. I stopped pretending I wasn't the floor. That was the moment he understood the scale of it. Not the humiliation of one night. The infrastructure of 17 years. He sank into a chair at the kitchen table, elbows on his knees. What do you want? He asked. I considered the question carefully. I wanted respect, I said. Not applause. Not obedience. Respect. And now I want alignment. With what? With your definition of me. He looked confused. If I am nothing, I explained calmly, then my contributions must reflect nothing. His shoulders sagged. I didn't think it would go this far, he whispered. That's the problem, I said quietly. You never thought about it at all. Silence again. Thick, heavy, honest. Outside, the world continued undisturbed. Inside, the illusion had collapsed. He finally stood. Claire is furious, he said. She's entitled to be. She says you destroyed the most important night of our lives. I met his eyes without blinking. No, I said evenly. I revealed who built it. He held my gaze for a long time, and for the first time since he was 6 years old. He looked uncertain about who his real foundation had been. That uncertainty was not cruelty. It was education, and the lesson had only just begun. Ethan didn't leave immediately that night. He stood in my kitchen like a man waiting for a verdict that had already been delivered. The confidence he wore so easily at the estate was gone. In its place was something raw, uncertain. "You didn't have to involve the business," he said again, but softer now. Less accusation, more realization. "I didn't involve it," I replied. "It was always involved. You just never acknowledged how." He didn't argue. For years, I had allowed him to operate under the illusion that the company was his alone. His vision, his grind, his risk. I let him speak about building from nothing in interviews and networking events while my capital quietly reinforced the walls behind him. I never corrected him. "That was my mistake. Claire thinks you did this because she embarrassed you," he said carefully. I gave a small, humorless exhale. "She didn't embarrass me," I answered. "She exposed something." He frowned. "What?" "That you agreed with her." The words hung there, unavoidable. He tried to deny it. I saw it forming in his throat, but it never made it out, because he knew. Silence is agreement when it matters most. I walked toward my study. "Sit," I said. He hesitated, then followed. The room was orderly. Files labeled, shelves aligned. 17 years of discipline represented in paper and quiet decisions. I opened the drawer of my desk and pulled out a thin leather folder. He watched my hands. Inside were documents I had prepared months earlier. Not out of vengeance, out of foresight. You don't spend nearly 2 decades in a role built on conditional acceptance without learning to prepare for impact. I placed the folder on the desk between us. "What's this?" he asked. "Legacy," I replied. He opened it. His eyes moved across the pages. Slowly at first, then faster. The trust fund. The one I had been quietly building for years. Not for Ethan. For his future children. For stability beyond me. For something that would outlast pride and ego and fragile definitions of family. "It's reassigned," he said, voice tightening. "Yes." The beneficiary line no longer carried his surname. It now listed an educational foundation for underprivileged children. Endowment secured. Funds transferred. Irrevocable. He looked up at me as if I had struck him. "You can't be serious." "I am. That was for our kids." "No," I corrected gently. "It was for my grandchildren." The distinction landed. He stood abruptly. "This is revenge." I didn't raise my voice. "No," I said calmly. "This is alignment." "With what?" he demanded. "With your definition of me." He stared, confusion mixing with anger. "If I am nothing to you," I continued, "then my legacy does not belong to you either." His hands trembled slightly as he flipped through the pages again. "It's done?" he asked. "Yes." "You can't reverse it?" "No." He paced the room, the floor absorbing the impact of his panic. "That was security," he muttered. "That was generational." "Yes," I agreed. "And you just gave it away." I redirected it. "To strangers. To children who will understand what support means." That hurt him. Good. Because for the first time he was experiencing the cost of dismissal. He stopped pacing and faced me. "Do you know what this looks like?" "Yes. It looks like you're trying to punish us for one mistake." "One mistake," I repeated quietly. He faltered. "One sentence," I said. "One public dismissal. One silent confirmation. But it wasn't one mistake. It was 17 years of small confirmations that I tolerated." His shoulders lowered slightly. "You always acted like it didn't bother you," he said. "It did." "Then why didn't you say anything?" "Because I hoped you would notice without being told." "That's not fair." "No," I agreed. "It wasn't." For years, I had convinced myself patience was noble, that enduring quiet disrespect was strength, that eventually gratitude would mature naturally. It doesn't. Calcifies into expectation. "You built everything," he said after a long pause. "Yes. And we never treated you like you did." "No." The honesty in the room was suffocating. He sank back into the chair. Claire had probably told him I overreacted, that I let pride dictate my response, that real fathers don't withdraw love over words. But love and funding are not the same thing, and respect is not optional. What do we do now? He asked quietly. I folded my hands on the desk. You build, I said. With what? With your own foundation. His jaw tightened again. That will take years. Yes. We might lose the house. Possibly. The business could shrink. Likely. And you're okay with that? I held his gaze steadily. I'm okay with truth. He leaned back and stared at the ceiling. For the first time in his life, he was looking at a future without my safety net beneath it. Not because I hated him, but because he had defined me out of it. You could have just talked to me, he whispered again. I am talking to you now. And there's no way back? I considered that carefully. There is always a way back, I said slowly, but not to the same place. He didn't understand. So I explained. You don't lose me because I stopped paying. You lost me when you agreed I was nothing. His throat tightened. I didn't mean nothing, but you allowed it. He covered his face with his hands for a long moment. When he looked up again, something in his expression had shifted. Not anger, recognition. You were the foundation, he said quietly. Yes. And we treated you like an option. Yes. The words seemed to break something inside him. He nodded slowly. Claire would rage. Lauren would plead. Extended family would call me cruel, dramatic, vindictive. They would all focus on the money, because money is easier to discuss than dignity. But this was never about the cost of a wedding. It was about the cost of erasure. Ethan stood up finally. So that's it? He asked. For now, I replied. You're just done. I'm done pretending. He moved toward the door of the study, then paused. I thought you'd always be there, he admitted quietly. I said, and that was the tragedy of it. I had always been there, unmoving, uncelebrated, unquestioned, until the moment I decided to move. After he left, the house felt different. Not empty, honest. I sat alone at my desk and stared at the signed documents. The foundation would announce the endowment publicly within weeks. Scholarships would be funded. Names of children who had never met me would carry forward something my own household rejected. It wasn't revenge. It was alignment. If I was nobody to them, then my legacy did not belong to them either. And only then did they begin to understand something they had never considered before. They hadn't lost money. They had lost the structure that made everything else possible. 17 years. Reduced to one question I could no longer ignore. Was I wrong to finally define myself the way they had defined me? Or would you have endured it longer than I did?